importantly, I know it's something that a lot of people aspire to do. One is to become a consultant and join a top consulting firm. Along with that, I think another thing that's completely laud-worthy is the fact that he's an alumnus of BITS Pilani, which is the Birla Institute of Technology and Science Pilani. As we know today, lakhs of students write the BITSAT. A lot of students dream of going to this particular institution. This institution has been here for so many years now. It has such a great reputation that it has attracted in these many years. If I may not be wrong in saying this, but we call it akin to Stanford and MIT in India for the very forward-looking curriculum and the kind of culture that they have at BITS Pilani. So I'm going to be chatting with Anurup today and understanding from him that firstly, how did he decide that he wanted to become an engineer? What is it that attracted him? Then secondly, how did he sort of prepare for the engineering entrance exams? How did he specifically prepare for the BITSAT? What was that process like? After that, once he got to BITS Pilani, what was campus life like? What were the kind of opportunities that he got? And finally, how did he end up at Dalberg post Pilani? Like, how was that journey? How was the placements journey? So we're going to be chatting about this and a lot more. So firstly, thank you so much, Anurup, for taking out the time from your busy schedule and joining us this evening.
No, thanks so much for having me here. Looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Super. So I think let's just straight dive into the conversation. To all the students, teachers, educators, parents who are joining me today, please make sure you're sending us all your questions. We're going to include it in our conversation with Anurup. And make sure you send us a lot of questions, because I think this is your exclusive chance to ask him about his journey of how he made it to BITS, what was BITS like, and how did he end up where he is at today. So first question first, Anurup, let's understand from you, what actually prompted you to choose engineering as a career pathway? Is that something that was always something that fascinated you, or was it something that, your parents are engineers, that's why you ended up choosing it? Like, what were the reasons? How come engineering, Anurup?
Yeah, good questions. I think it's there's no straight answer to this, but it's like a variety of different reasons that led to engineering kind of being the option that I chose back while I was in school. So I think first thing was probably around just like a bit of fascination with tech. I think as a generation, we've been at the cusp of a lot of tech developments, and it's kind of cool being a part of it, experiencing it live, but also engineering provided an opportunity actually like kind of be a part of that overall revolution and to contribute to, what's happening worldwide right now. I think the second one was potentially around the sort of subjects that I'd started liking while I was in school. So I think I had a keen inclination towards physics and maths, and like more generally, I think learning about machines, having gotten a bit of exposure towards both electronics and computer science back in school. So that kind of fed into just like my inclination towards this particular opportunity. Of course, there was a bit of a push from parents as well. But I think most importantly, and this is where the broader educational ecosystem kind of steps in, is just that I honestly felt that I think engineering provided like a really, really good platform for you to kind of springboard into multiple different career opportunities, which may or may not be restricted, like engineering as a profession as a whole. So it's just the opportunity to keep your options open going forward, to learn a lot from incredibly smart people out there, and also potentially pursue like a passion of yours.
I think that makes sense. So, I think the diversity of careers within the engineering realm and the kind of opportunities it opened for you definitely was, I think, one of the biggest pulls for you to actually look at engineering seriously as a career pathway. Now, when did you decide for sure that engineering was your calling, and when did you start sort of preparing for the engineering entrance exams? Because, in quota, it's as early as 6th standard. So was it that early?
Yeah. No, thankfully not. I wouldn't advise people to actually start prepping that early either. So I think I kind of made up my mind post 10th. There was a bit of there was a lot of breathing room post the 10th board exams, wherein it's also like that moment wherein you make your decision about what you want to do in the next 2 years. Because that eventually has a bearing on what you want to do. So you see a lot of people pursuing arts and commerce and picking up commerce as a career pathway and then following that route accordingly. You see some people, following science and then either picking pure sciences and engineering as a career pathway. So I think 10th was when it kind of hit me that, yeah, like I need to make a choice now. And perhaps this is the best choice for me back then. And I did start preparing like from when 10th ended, like when like board exams got over, 11th was about to start. So that's when we kind of got into the whole drill of going in for hardcore engineering entrance exam prep.
Right. So did you like sort of make a list of what were the exams that you were going to attempt, or like how did it, like what was the strategy behind first sort of identifying which were the exams that I'm going to focus on?
So I think the good thing, or rather one of the positives about just like the way engineering in India is set up, I think, is that you have a couple of key exams that allow for you to like to apply to like 90% of the colleges out there. Like I think being the JEE, like maybe a couple of years before my time, there was the IEEE as well. And there are a couple of regional entrance exams as well, like the CET in Karnataka, for example, that are more focused towards what's happening within the state itself. So it's kind of just like around maybe doing a bit of research around what are the exams that can allow for you to optimize for applying for most of the colleges, most of the reputed colleges out there, and also independently trying to figure out, are there certain exams such as like, the entrance exam for say BITS, for example, or the entrance exam for Manipal back then, and even for VIT, for example, that, you should, where there's a fair bit of overlap between curriculums, and you don't have to put in a lot more extra effort towards actually trying to satisfy those criteria.
Right.
So, yeah.
So like if I were to ask you, what was your macro plan in place in terms of like preparation? Because like you said, you made up your mind after the 10th standard board exams, which gave you 11th and 12th. And both are also fairly crucial years. I mean, in terms of the academic pressure that you have. So how did you sort of divide your time between school, between, coaching? Like, did you firstly join coaching? Do you recommend it? I mean, if you recommend it, how did you kind of balance your time between both? How did you, what was your general strategy in terms of, how you were going to be approaching the preparation of this exam? So if you can talk about, like, for example, what are the different papers that one commonly sees, like in the JEE, as well as the BITSAT, and how much was the time that you were allotting to each subject in a day? How much of it kind of overlapped with your school studies? Did it actually go along with it, or was it extra? So what were the kind of challenges and what was the strategy that you had in place?
Yeah. So I think the straightforward answer to the question on coaching, yes, I did join a coaching center called BASE, which is a Karnataka focused coaching center. And I used to have I think maybe in my 11th, I had about 3 days of classes for about 3 hours each during the week, and maybe like the Sunday that was also dedicated to this, for us to actually go in physically into classes and then kind of come up to speed with the curriculum for these entrances. And in 12th, that kind of got amped up, wherein we were probably having 4 or 5 days a week kind of involved in coaching, like post school, usually from 5 to 8 or 6 to 9, and then of course the weekends themselves. So I would strongly advise people to kind of follow, or at least be involved in some sort of coaching center per se, if engineering exams in India is your objective. I think, and this is something that struck me like post 10th itself, is that like my knowledge of what it is that I'm being tested for in school versus what I'm being tested for, say, for an engineering entrance, I think miles apart, like not in terms of the subject content, but just in the terms of the way I'm being tested for it. And I think, unless you actually join a coaching center wherein they've laid out the nuts and bolts of how you're going to be kind of tested during these exams and like what are the things that you need to be prioritizing, it's very, very difficult. So I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are able to like kind of crack this without coaching. But I think for the vast majority of everyone, like this is the potential route that, they end up following. And it's also probably like an advisable thing. I think that being said, what I would say is that it's 11th and 12th, like, even outside of coaching, it's an incredibly pivotal time for like, developing oneself outside of academics. And I think people who are maybe outside the metros face some challenges in actually, seeing coming through on that. So it's kind of just like not losing sight of or not making engineering prep like in 11th and 12th like your only go-to as much as people might advise for it. Like I think it's kind of just balancing out a different set of things, and I'll get into that a bit later. But make sure that you're accounting for holistic all-round development, like while you're also preparing. Like there's one, like people spending 12 to 14 or 16 hours a day just doing engineering entrance prep, I think is suboptimal at best, and you see a lot of people burning out. So make sure that you're kind of prioritizing your own mental, physical health and your overall development along the way. I think to answer some of your other questions around just like the challenges that came up and like how I was prioritizing, say, school versus prepping for exam entrances itself. So I think there's always been like a bit of a catch up. I was in ISC back then, and there was always the curriculum. There was always a bit of a catch up in terms of some of the subjects not being completely in sync with each other. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think chemistry was the one wherein the emphasis, or rather the timing in which different portions of subjects were covered, varied a lot. And I think that was where I had to put in a bit more time for my school for actually ensuring that I'm kind of covering portions that aren't being covered by my entrance prep. I think at the end of 12th though, all syllabuses, be it CBSE, be it ISC, be it preparing for JEE, I think they all end up converging. When and it becomes a lot easier to like kind of see the broader macro picture about how you should be tackling each of these exams at that point. It's the points along the way that are a bit of a struggle, and I think there will always be this case wherein like there might be like a 2-month gap in the middle wherein you don't have, say, a school exam per se, and that's when you decide to not prioritize school academics as much, but you instead try to focus on engineering prep. But then there are these like, say, 1 or 2 week phases in which you have back-to-back exams in school, and obviously need to perform on them. So that's when you kind of hit the brake a bit on engineering prep, and then you start focusing here. So it was incredibly difficult in terms of just like the syllabus not coming together when you would have wanted them to. At the end of all of it, I would say it kind of simplifies a lot and it eases out your life a lot, but it's always going to be a challenge in the middle. And what I will say, what I would additionally add, I think there are some incredibly pivotal exams in both cases. So for example, like while we're preparing for engineering entrances, I think everyone was being told that, you also should try out, say, this pure sciences exam called the KVPY. And that's a pretty important one for people to try out. So I think it's one of those times when you realize that, sure, my entrance exam's at the end of 12th, but this one is an equally important one along the way. So let me actually focus on this. And on the flip side, maybe there's a case in which school exams matter a lot more. Perhaps your final exams in 11th, and that's when you kind of slow down a bit on the entrance prep and then focus here. But yeah, I hope that answers your question in terms of.
No, it definitely does. And I think it does add some perspective. So I have some more questions leading from your responses. Firstly, I'd also like to know from you, I mean, once you got into like BITS, etc. Generally, like, a lot of students who want to get into engineering, there are like 2 questions that, go on in their mind, or rather, I'd say 3 questions. Question number 1 would be that what is the combination that you would recommend that one should take, like in 11th and 12th, like in terms of the subjects that you think you would kind of work better if you're looking to write an engineering entrance exam. The second question that I would ask you is, do you think that there should be a preference in terms of the board that, one should sort of select, like, is ISC a good option or is CBSE a good option? And the third is, like, I know as a matter of fact, like from your background, like you mentioned in 11th and 12th, you were in Bishop Cotton Boys School. But a lot of students also face the pressure of getting into these I might say, what, you call these pre-university colleges that have tied up with these coaching centers where, basically they are largely doing coaching center work, but they're also basically doing the state board exam. So what is it like? How do you make that choice? Like, what is the suitable route? I mean, you have met so many people who have come in your batch in BITS Pilani. So generally, majority come from which combination, which board, And do they come from these integrated pre-university coaching centers, or are these people who have gone to school and, like you said, have had a balance of, like holistic development along with preparing for the entrance exams?
Yeah. So I think one pretty easy to answer. It's on a combination of subjects. I think honestly, like I don't think you can do it without taking sciences in 11th and 12th. Like you need a combination of math, physics, and chemistry. If needed, and if you're open to the idea and you're medical entrances at the same time, which also can be, which and there are people who do that, but it can be insanely difficult time. Is you might want to take up biology as your sixth subject, as instead of maybe something like an electronics or a computer science. I think if you made up your mind early on in 10th about the subjects that you want to take, optimize for making, or rather, what I would say is optimize lowering maybe the burden of academics in school, such that it serve as a barrier of sorts into how you're preparing for things. I think the second one, in terms of so my honest recommendation is that I think CBSE is the best board to actually prepare for while I chose ISC because I had a lot of attachment to my own school, and I knew that at the end of all of it, the syllabus would catch up to each other. But I think the most efficient and optimized sort of preparation for not just entrance exams like the JEE, but also the likes of CET and other regional entrances, I think there's no substitute for CBSE. Like with their NTSE, I think it's called. I'm not sure. Is it? I think there's a certain terminology that they use. I think it's called NTSE or something else. But the syllabus is pretty much in sync with what is expected at the end of the entrance. I know there's a question about IGCSE, and I think this is the international board. So I personally haven't seen anyone who's done the international board and actually gotten into engineering entrances. I think there might be like very, very few examples out there who've done this, but I think it's the way of teaching is very different in the international boards, and they're not really set up for you succeeding in an entrance exam. They're really good boards on their own, but I think they're more set up they're more designed for you to succeed in applying for international exams. I think your third question, which is around the sort of PUC or pre-university college route.
Yeah, integrated coaching.
Yeah. So integrated coaching, I would say if you're doing it, do it from the best places out there. I think there's been a lot of proliferation of a lot of integrated coaching centers in cities like Bangalore, in other metros, but also in a lot of say tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Because integrated coaching, I think at times it can be a really, really big hit or a miss. Like I know people in Pilani who have been, who joined college and were incredibly burnt out entirely by the time they joined. Like, so, I mean, they really, like, while they had overcome this whole barrier of actually getting into a solid engineering college, I think they weren't really able to like experience it and enjoy it fully, because a lot of the tension, the stress that builds up by being in an integrated coaching center is, I think it carries on for very long, and it takes a while to actually dust that off. So if you're doing it, it can be a bit of a hit or a miss. Do it from the best ones out there. And yeah, I think generally the mix of people that do end up there, I'd say it kind of varies, right? Like at least in BITS, there was a good balance between people from integrated, coaching centers and from people who had done school and coaching separately. So there's no straight answer to where is the most prominent batch coming from.
Right. So actually, there's a follow-up question that we have after the IGCSE board question, which is that are IG kids eligible for studying in India for engineering? Can they cope up with the study system? So I think these are two parts. Well, I definitely think they are eligible. But the coping up part of it, I think you'll be able to tell us that. Yeah. Do you think that somebody who comes from the international board will be able to cope up with the way the studies go on at BITS, like the kind of curriculum you have at BITS?
Good question. I'm thinking. So I think it'll be a lot more difficult than people who have been used to like the typical way of preparing for entrances. I think IGCSE as a way in which it's set up, I think they focus a lot more on not just pure academic development, but also like kind of, you know, slightly more practical hands-on experience. And that I think that kind of helps. But as a student, I would my best guess would be that it'll take a bit of time to actually get used to the way that engineering colleges function, because I think the environment over there ends up being slightly competitive. It kind of ends up being wherein, you know, the academic pressure is high.
Very rigorous.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I think that answers it really well. So, I mean, before we move on to the next segment of this, I would actually like to know that what, you know, if you can, just for the benefit, because, you know, I know we have a mixed audience here. So for the benefit of the audience joining us here, if you can talk about that, what are the subjects that one has to go through in JEE and the BITSAT exam largely? And from the top of your mind, if you can come up with like some resources that you highly recommend that were very helpful for you during preparation. Because I remember when I was attempting my hand at the engineering exams preparation, you know, that time the Russian books used to be really famous.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to say that, you know, you should solve those problems because they are at a much more advanced level. And that is actually going to help you be ready for the JEE. But I'm sure times have changed a lot now. So from the top of your mind, just the subjects and some top references that you think were very helpful to you.
Yeah, it's good. That's a good question. I think so. Before I do answer that, I think worth giving a bit of context into how the JEE and the BITSATs differ. I think the JEE mains and the JEE advanced are what I would say are slightly more intensive towards much more hardcore problem solving, and much more, and they test a lot more for the fundamentals and the basics of how you understand things like, say, you know, quantum, like things like, say, mechanics, or things like, say, calculus and integration and whatnot. Like they test a lot more for those fundamentals, and the number of questions is lower compared to the overall time you have. Whereas on the BITSAT, you have about, like, say, 150 odd questions that you need to attempt in about 3 hours, which is probably like 50% higher in terms of sort number of questions versus the JEE. And I think what they're testing for in the BITSAT is of course to some extent the fundamentals, but also the speed at which you can accurately solve some of these problems. So I guess the rigor of the problems will end up being slightly lesser. They will not be as intense as the JEE mains or advanced, but you'll end up finding a lot more problems, and you'll find also some traps that they've laid out in terms of, you know, answers being non-obvious when you actually look at them. So the key thing while trying to prepare for these two exams separately is kind of just keeping your eye on like the sort of clock that's running, because on one hand, you're trying to get your fundamentals right, you're trying to like ensure that you're minimizing for negative marking and whatnot, whereas I think on the BITSAT it's kind of the opposite, wherein you're trying to optimize for answering as many questions as possible. And you kind of do see that when the cutoffs do come out. Like I think the cutoffs for, at least back in my time, and it has kind of dropped since then, but I think the cutoffs end up being at least 70% of what the absolute score is. So that's, I think, on the nature of just how the test is taken. I think the second one is on the subjects. I think for physics, chemistry, and maths, the syllabus is largely the same. Like maybe there might just be like, say, one subject that is kind of different. And I think when people actually look into the syllabus of each of these, they'll easily figure it. I think physics was the one wherein there were just like one or two minor subjects within, rather one or two minor chapters within physics that kind of were not present in JEE. But I think outside of this, out of the 150 questions that you do tackle on the BITSAT, about 25 of them are just like solely mental math based and English based. I think for English, what really helped me was, I know a lot of my friends were preparing for law entrances, and they had a pretty hardcore English component to it. So I kind of leaned on them a bit for actually providing some of the material that they were using, which because the English here ends up being slightly rigorous. It's not as simple as what one would do in 11th or 12th. It kind of, they focus a lot more on grammatical consistency, language correctness, and like slightly more advanced topics than one encounters in school. So I used personally like my my law school friends who were preparing back then as sounding boards to actually, run all of my prep there. I think for mental math, it's mental math tends to be more like some of your in-school competitive exams, wherein, the objective is to try and think of ways to solve problems creatively, think a bit out of the box, and what do you call? Ensure that you're just like handy on your fingertips. So trying to solve for these problems like in really, really quickly is, I think, the key there. And then for mental math, I'd recommend that people not spend as much time as much as they do for English, because English is the one thing that I think people end up deprioritizing quite a bit. With mental math, given the math background that people usually have, it's more of a matter of towards the end of your preparation phase, just ironing out all of your practice and driving those like minor things home, like when you're writing the exam. So I think for preparation material, and probably like the students out there know the best, I'd say the standard JEE prep material that you would use in terms of the books. Honestly, like, I know which Russian book you're talking about. I think it was a physics book or a chemistry. I think it was a physics one. I'm not quite sure which one it was, but honestly, I never touched those. I think I kind of relied on the recommendations that were coming in from the coaching centers, and that is what I'd also advise people out there to kind of follow. Is because these coaching centers kind of they stay up to date with the syllabus, with the changing nature of the question paper format, and also like they have an eye on which colleges say setting the paper back then, so they know what sort of questions are going to come as a result of that. So follow their lead. I think also try and get in diverse perspectives. So if students out there have like friends of theirs who are in different coaching centers or preparing differently, make sure that you're getting those perspectives as well, because different centers tend to recommend different books, the syllabus of which often ends up being exactly the same. So try and gather in as much diverse perspective as you can. I think for the BITSAT specifically, I'm not sure which publication it was. I think it was either an Akash publication or something else that had like a set of really, really curated specific questions for the BITSAT. So this was like a short book with about, I think, 10 to 15 different papers of 150 questions each that I would honestly recommend people go out there. I can't recall the publication entirely. I think it was Akash Publications, but they have this set of papers that is really, really helpful for people to just kind of switch out of the whole JEE mode of preparation and tuning themselves a little more towards the BITSAT style of preparing. And I would honestly recommend also that there's no need for touching that book until, say, like 2 months before the exam. So continue with preparing as is, and then maybe you can switch into exam-specific preparation once as the exams approach.
Right. So like you were talking about the fact that, during the exam, it's important to get different perspectives, which you might get from, your friends who are at different coaching centers. But apart from that, did you also like sign up for a test series or a mock test series of any other coaching center along with the one that you were already part of? Or did you just sort of keep yourself only to one? Because I'm just trying to understand that, did you want to like practice on a different set of papers? So did you feel the need to actually go and take up a test series of another coaching center, or you just stuck to base?
Yeah. So I honestly largely just stuck to base. I think where more of the practice and the preparation came in was more from the books. So like all of these books end up having like dedicated question answer sets towards the end, wherein you and it's kind of a self-practice, self-prophesizing thing over there, wherein you set your own timer, you practice those papers while you're actually going for it, and then they also end up having like pretty detailed explanations of how you want to actually approach a problem. So I didn't personally do it. I've seen a lot of people do it. I think there are a lot of people out there who say, at least back in my time, like, and even right now, I would say, like, if they're, say, doing a coaching center in a metro city, what they would also do at the same time is kind of sign up for an online an online Allen or an online like one more of these quota focused coaching centers that run some of these online courses and at least have their tests online, such that so that you just end up getting exposure to the way those questions are set. Yeah.
Right. And did you also since time management is key in competitive exams, so were you also timing yourself when you were solving these questions? Like
Yeah.
first time on your radar as well, and how important is for you to start timing yourself once you get into prep?
Yeah. No, that's fair. So I think I would honestly say, like, when you're starting off with the preparation, when you're learning a new subject or a new chapter within a certain subject, like, I think it's okay to keep it open ended, because at that point you're trying to optimize for getting your basics and fundamentals correct, as opposed to actually uh, cracking your question. So if you're trying to understand calculus, then focus on understanding the basics of it. Like, try and test out for those questions that might take half an hour to solve at times, but at least, like, help get the basics clear in your head. I think over time, as in when you get closer to some of these practice tests that coaching centers usually hold, is when you kind of start putting a stronger eye on the timer. And I think all of these, at least some of the really good coaching centers out there, I think they end up doing a really good job of setting question papers, like, say, once in 2 months, wherein they test you actively on how you're doing in certain subjects that have been covered until then, and also just like on how your timing is. So I think I would argue at least the tech's evolved a lot more, so that you get more detailed reports about how you're doing on an exam more generally.
Right. And as we all know, this is a very pressurizing exam. I mean, lakhs of students write these exams every year. How did you handle your nerves during these 2 years of preparation?
Good question. So I think maybe the good part about it is, like, being at Bishop Cotton's, like, which is where I was studying at school, was, I think, there were a lot of avenues for just exercising non-academic interests. So they really help take your mind off of things. I think always in the current situations, the key things are, like, don't compromise on basic things like your diet, on your sleep, and potentially at least some physical fitness. And I think a lot of people over those 2 years, they end up compromising heavily on this. Like, people come out, wearing like, okay, 4 or 5 hours of sleep a day as a badge of honor. And I don't think that's the right way to do it. Like, especially in those 2-3 months wherein all of the entrances are held, just make sure you're getting adequate rest. Make sure you're not sort of stretching yourself too much. And I think don't my honest advice would be that, like, at that stage wherein all of the exams are so close, don't focus on learning new content as much as you focus on revising some of your earlier content, because a bit of the intuition gets set when you're studying those subjects. Whereas towards the end of the whole learning phase, I think it kind of ends up being more of a patchy, panicky way of actually studying new content, which is not going to help you out, I'd say. So just try and balance out some of these things. Make sure, I think, at least, like, the students out there need to make sure that they're getting at least 7 hours of sleep a day. Like, I think that is the main thing, especially before exams.
Right. So let's talk about, I think, the fun aspect. So how was life at BITS Pilani? How do you think the culture of the BITS Pilani campus is different from IITs or other institutions in India? So if you can talk about your experience at Pilani.
Yeah. So I think campus life is always eventful. In BITS particularly, it was kind of a situation in which a lot of the non-academic exposure that I had back in school, fortunately, also was present heavily on campus. So I think there were a lot of avenues for people to exercise technical skills, such as technical teams that people could join, a lot of avenues to exercise cultural skills like dance, music, debating, and so on. And I think there's a very vibrant club culture and also technical team culture at BITS, wherein they go out of their way to hold regular sessions. So I think music's one thing that's very strong. I think I remember the music club, like, we're practicing every day for about 2-3 hours, and a lot of my close friends being a part of it. So I think there are people who have joined BITS with zero knowledge about instruments, musical instruments, and then kind of picking it up along the way, and then becoming really skilled at it by the time they leave college. So I would say there's a good system for support in terms of learning some of these non-academic skills. I would say there's a good system for support in terms of a lot of senior and junior interaction taking place. I think as a result of how the culture's evolved over time, there's just a lot more bonding and interaction between seniors and juniors in an incredibly healthy way. I think uh, I'm still in touch with a lot of my seniors from college, and I would consider them to be some of my closest friends. Likewise, how like some of my closest juniors are also in constant touch with me, and it kind of it's been a thing that kind of transcends over time. So you would see a lot of the older batches also coming in and speaking to this, and I think it will also continue to be the case. Uh, I think in terms of the academics, the academic pressure or the academic or the emphasis on academics kind of varies by subject. So I think in electronics, in chemical engineering, there's definitely like the academic pressure is much more. But I think in some of the other subjects, such as mechanical and computer science, the pressure kind of eases out, and it allows for you to like just you know ensure that you're having like enough exposure to all of these non-academic spheres in BITSian life. I think the main thing about the campus, at least in Pilani, is that it's incredibly self-contained. Anything that you require on campus, anything you require in terms of just making sure that you're having a good time on campus in learning the right things, and also anything that you might require from a personal perspective as well is kind of present over there. Not just as a result of facilities being present there, but also as a result of like just like the ecosystem developing around. Let's make sure that our students are being provided with the right kind of support while they're on campus. It's self-contained. It's also a bit isolated from what I would say is the rest of the world, because I think the closest city out there is Delhi, which is at least about 5 hours away by train, by cab, by whatever. So you end up like, I guess, over-indexing a lot more on just making sure that your campus life is in order. And I think at least the administration and also senior batches try and make sure that you have a good time while you're on campus. I think the way what I would answer the second part of the question, which is differences in culture between the IITs and the BITS. So I think culture at BITS is slightly less rigorous in terms of academic pressure. Like I think it's not as competitive. It's a lot more cooperative and healthy, because I think people recognize that, well, we've come from 2 years of going through insane amounts of competition. Let it kind of ease out. We've also kind of we're in an ecosystem, or rather we're in a physical location wherein there are not that many opportunities out there for actually interacting with people and building relationships. So you end up relying a lot more on your college batchmates, on your seniors and juniors for like help and support across campuses, across your college life rather. And I think the second element, what I would say, is that as a result of just a lot more freedom being bestowed to students, is that people end up doing a lot of things outside of just academics. Like you will see, I think the startup ecosystem in BITS is really strong. There's a huge network of support from alumni, but more generally, like on a per college or on a per campus basis, I think if you were to look at the past 10 years of how startups have come out from different colleges, I think BITS is probably like one of those colleges that really stands out from like individual campuses of the IITs. So the freedom that you're allowed as an individual, and I think the broader, just the peer culture over there is much more supportive for you to pursue all of these other professional avenues.
Fantastic. No, I think thank you so much for giving us that in-depth insight into what life is like for a student at BITS Pilani. I think we have another question that's coming up that though I'm of the opinion that I think that the only entrance exam scores that the BITS accepts is the BITSAT. Though, is that true, or do they accept scores of other exams also, like the SAT?
Yeah. So I think I kind of get where this question's coming from, because I think in very recent times, and I think this was in my 4th year in college, is when they started accepting some SAT scores from NRI students. I think for like residents of India, I think the BITSAT is the only option. But my honest answer to this would be like, I think worth doing a bit of research into this. I don't really know what's going on right now. Like I think things might have changed slightly. And they are accepting SAT scores. I think some subject SAT scores, but it's only for a select set of few people based on just like their geographical background.
All right, perfect. And can we talk a bit about also the access of opportunities, like in terms of internships, etc.? What was it like at BITS Pilani?
Yeah, yeah. So what I would say is that I don't think the internship or the opportunity, access to opportunity is fundamentally different between like the IITs and the BITS. I think it's the same throughout. What I will say is that I think the industry in terms of jobs and whatnot is kind of shifting towards a slightly more academic or rather an internship heavy form of recruiting, wherein earlier when companies used to come down for recruiting for full-time roles, now they come down a lot more for recruiting for internship roles. And then people kind of end up being judged on those 2 to 3 months of involvement over the course of the summer, and they may or may not get a return offer based on their performance. So the industry is shifting a bit towards internships, and I think placements as they were earlier, maybe not as in terms of the placement statistics. I think they're as solid as earlier, but if companies do end up coming down to kind of recruit for internships and they find the right set of people, then they kind of close their recruitment process there. And I think there are a fair few opportunities as well across the board that people kind of do pursue. I think the other thing, and this is kind of key to BITS, is that there's this whole practice school curriculum, which is like a 6-month college mandated internship wherein they kind of place you in different companies to actually experience 6 months of working in the industry, which I think is incredibly brilliant and incredibly unique to BITS, which I think also sets the right tone for a lot of students getting like return offers from some of these companies that they intern at. So that I think, yeah, I don't think any other college in India actually does that.
Fantastic. So how did you end up choosing Dalberg? How come you decided to be a consultant? Is that something that you sort of figured out at engineering school? How did that happen? How did you undertake that journey?
Yeah, no, good question. And yeah, I think the honest answer to that is, I guess, like over the course of my 4 years at BITS, I think at least towards the end of my third year, it kind of struck me that, well, I do enjoy engineering. I do like what I'm being taught, but whether or not I pursue this as a full-time career, I guess, is kind of unsure. Like, I'm not sure. I wasn't sure back then whether I saw myself doing this like long term. So I think it kind of just struck me that maybe, okay, even if I do end up taking up like a pure, say, an electronics focused or a computer science focused role, like likelihood what would end up happening would be that I would, spend a couple of years and then try and explore different things. But to me, I guess, like, just the variety of opportunities that were there out there in college kind of led me to maybe pursue consulting as a career, because it kind of sets up also another base for you to explore different industries at the same time. So yeah, I guess I was just trying to like play around and navigate through what in my head was a bit of a muddled decision making at the time, which is, I like engineering, but I don't really want to pursue it as a career. And I want to keep my options open and keep exploring. So I think consulting fit right into what I was, hoping to get out of right after college.
Right. And so now that, if you could talk to us a little bit about what are you doing at Dalberg, what is your role as a consultant, and do you think your education at BITS Pilani helped you for it?
Yeah. So I think for people who aren't aware, Dalberg is a social impact consulting firm. We end up advising clients such as large multinational UN agencies, the likes of philanthropies like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a couple of corporates on their social impact strategies. And we work across sectors such as financial inclusion, across health, across education, across water, sanitation, hygiene, across justice more recently. And it's kind of different from pure corporate consulting in the sense that we're helping a client solve for a certain social impact problem, as opposed to them solving for a business problem, which is what consultants typically end up doing. I think the day-to-day, it kind of varies, right? Like I feel like, given there's no strict answer to what the day-to-day looks like, but it's a whole mix of detailed problem solving around data modeling, around analysis, around creating a story around actually helping the client think through how do they go about solving for a social impact problem, given the past experience that the firm is at. And we kind of serve at the early stage as the analytical nuts and bolts towards actually answering some of their questions. So I think some of the experience that helped me, I think definitely a lot of the way in which culturally you're exposed at BITS towards a mix of both academic and non-academic rigor, I think helps open up your mind towards just like thinking slightly more creatively about different things that are out there. So it's, you not just think about things in the most theoretical sense, but also you think about the practical implementation challenges that might come in with, say, creating a product or creating a service, for example, which I don't think I would have been able to do had I not gotten, had I not experienced college life or campus life in its full, in the entirety that it was. And I think the other things are just like what you're also expected to do as consultants is kind of think very quickly on your feet, come up with creative solutions to problems, which I think as a result of what you're doing or what you've done over the 4 years at BITS, both via academics, via different types of exposure, I think it just helps you attune your mindset towards, the sort of work that I'm doing right now. So long story short is that a mix of all of the things kind of helped me become a much more creative problem solver, slightly more out of the box thinking, and also thinking through a lot more practical implementation challenges, which I think are kind of demanded out of my role right now.
Wow, I think that's fantastic that you feel that your education at BITS Pilani actually helped you in becoming like a comprehensive thinker, which is definitely helping your role as a consultant. I think we've now run out of time, Anurup, and I would like to thank you for taking up the time and joining us today and being so honest and candid about your journey of how you chose to be an engineer, how you got to Pilani, and how a life has been after. I think there's been so much that you've shared with us, which is going to be so inspiring for a lot of the students who joined us today, who are actually looking at walking a path similar to yours. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Super. And a big thank you to all our lovely audience members for sticking around for such a long time, asking us questions. We hope you found this incredibly helpful. We'll be back again on next Saturday at 5 p.m. where we'll be talking about a new topic that is close to the hearts of the students. Until then, we'll see you on next Saturday at 5 p.m. Mask up, everybody. Stay safe. The pandemic isn't over yet. Thank you. Bye-bye.